Hey guys, welcome to my channel. I hope you're all doing very well. So I just watched Marriage Story. Let's talk about it. Marriage Story is directed by Noah Baumbach. I'm so sorry for the mispronunciation. I'll put the name on the screen right here. This is a spoiler review. We are going to break down all of the parts of this film that I really enjoyed, some parts that I didn't enjoy quite as much. Let's just get into it. So first, let's start off with the good, and I have to say that the performances in this film were absolutely superb. Just mwah, chef's kiss. They were brilliant. First off, you have Adam Driver, who's portraying this stage director, a narcissistic sort of archetype of a very creative genius, but at the same time he's able to create this character who is very likable. Somehow he manages to balance along the line of being, you know, authentic and being this character who does have a lot of issues and a lot of unlikable traits about him. But overall, the character that Adam Driver portrays on screen is just so likable at the end of the day that you do sometimes overlook a few of his misgivings, which we'll talk about later on. But I have to say that the rawness of this character is something that is applaudable. Like, I really enjoyed seeing his journey through this divorce, this breakdown of the marriage that he had with Nicole, portrayed by Scarlett Johansson. Adam Driver is just such a fantastic actor. I said as much after I saw him in BlacKkKlansman last year, and I'll say it again. In this role, he's able to really peel back so many layers of a person going through the hardest times in their life. The same thing with Scarlett Johansson. She's absolutely great in this film as well. The way that she's interacting with Adam Driver's Charlie, I think their relationship is something that is so interesting to see, especially at the point that we get to see it where it's breaking down and where they're trying to build something completely new out of the ashes that is their marriage. They're trying to still keep a familial relationship for the sake of their child. And that is such an interesting point in time to view this relationship. And aside from the performances of the actors, which again was absolutely phenomenal, the director also has some creative choices in here that enhance their performances. Throughout the film, he has the tendency of keeping the camera locked in on the character as they're trying to explain themselves, especially in discussions that they're having where they're really reaching down deep into all of the emotional baggage that they have as a result of the trials and tribulations of that relationship. The camera kind of stays on Nicole's face or stays on Charlie's face throughout those moments, because you're supposed to kind of see the rundown of all of these different emotions that's going through their mind. And it's so effective because whilst the actors are giving that incredible performance, you're also able to see it. The way that it's edited, the way that it's shot, it really allows you to appreciate that and to really connect with those characters. And all of that just serves to add to the realness of this film. I felt that this film did an excellent job of depicting real life conversations. You have people talking over one another. You have them, you know, shouting at one another and then regretting the fact that they shouted, only to shout some more because they're going through such a hard time and there's so much frustration and anger and regret and resentment going on. And it's inevitable that you would have those sort of discussions happening. And sometimes they get so deep, so, you know, real, like a little too real, that you actually feel uncomfortable, like you shouldn't be a part of this conversation that's occurring between these two people. For example, when Adam Driver, he says at one point to Nicole, like, I wish you were dead. I every single day I dream of you just being run over and disappearing from my life. And that was just so shocking to me, because obviously it's not something that's very PC. It's not something that you would want to say to someone, especially the mother of his child. But because he's just going through it at that moment, everything is just coming out, it's just all word vomit. Then he just kind of breaks down, as if all of that pent up energy and that anger that it took to even say those words just kind of gets released from him, and he's just in agony afterwards. And it's just such a fantastic scene, and it speaks to the excellent writing here, where you feel like you can relate to these characters even if they are not complete, you know, representations of yourself. You see elements of yourself in these characters and you feel for them when they are going through such frustrating situations situations, even if you disagree with some of the things that they've done. Speaking of the relationship between Charlie and Nicole, I will say that it was so refreshing to see a relationship that was going through a breakup, that was breaking down, that still felt realistic and kind of authentic, because there was still love there. A lot of the time when you have characters who have broken up in films, especially in rom-coms, which that's a different story, we're not talking about a rom-com here, but in rom-coms it tends to be the case that like the exes just despise each other, like they hate each other to the point where you wonder, how were you ever even a thing? Like, how were you ever even together? Whereas here, you definitely see the love. There's definitely affection there. You have moments where, I mean, Nicole is still cutting Charlie's hair. She's still tying up his shoelaces for him. So even if there are moments of just pure and utter ugliness and anger and frustration, there are still moments as well of love and compassion and understanding, which I think is refreshing to see, because it's not quite as black or white when it comes to this situation. There are still going to be areas of grey, and I think this film does an excellent job of showing that. And in regards to the divorce specifically, I think this film does an excellent job of portraying the ugliest, most brutal elements of this separation and the entire process. It was so interesting to see how these characters who were already separating when we are introduced to them in the film, they've already decided that their marriage isn't going to work, but they wanted to end it on amicable terms. They didn't want their family to be reduced to scraps, to ashes. They went in with that mentality in mind, only to go through this hellhole that was the process of divorce. And it changed them, you know, it definitely changed the way that they were thinking. It definitely changed their motivations. It made them more spiteful towards each other. And it was so interesting to see that character shift, because I thought it was very well done. It was quite eventual, you know, one thing led to the other, and all of a sudden they were resenting each other and trying to get things that they didn't even want in the first place, that things that weren't ever a point of contention. But not only does this film highlight the very personal and emotional issues that the couple went through during the process of divorce, it also takes the time to reflect on the larger issues within the judicial system, and it touches on several, you know, points of contention there as well. For example, it talks about the bias towards women and towards mothers when it comes to divorce, especially because the courts are trying to kind of compensate for the decades upon decades of having these devalued or disadvantaged mothers being, you know, thrown to the wayside when their husbands wanted new partners, and they're trying to avoid that situation where you have a mother and their child just abandoned and left with nothing. As a result, as this film shows us, there could be cases where there's an overcompensation and where you're creating a bias against the father unnecessarily so. But at the same time, as Laura Dern points out, there is also a bias against women. Mothers are expected to be perfect, you know, as perfect as the Virgin Mary herself. Whereas in contrast, fathers tend to be way more able to get away with inconsistencies like, you know, absence and, you know, pursuing a career, pursuing a new relationship. They're not quite as hard on the father as they are on the mother, as she is expected in general to be the primary caregiver, and there are so many more expectations of her as a result. Now, this film isn't very friendly towards lawyers, which is understandable. We're dealing with a story about divorce, so obviously the lawyer isn't really going to be the hero of that story. But I will say what was very interesting is the fact that the lawyers were basically creating a self-fulfilling prophecy. At the beginning of the film, Laura Dern makes it very clear that even though Nicole might have the right intentions and she might be going into the divorce with, you know, the intention to be very civil and to be understanding, things always get ugly. That's definitely a running theme, and I actually think that it's something that the lawyers caused to happen. By insisting that things were going to get ugly, they took matters into their own hands. As a result, they were fighting back against each other, you know, trying to say like, why does he have to stay in Los Angeles and why does she have to get all of this money? The more that the lawyers asked for, the worse the relationship with the couple became. And as a result, it ended up being ugly and brutal the way that they had expected it to become. And finally, I also really enjoyed how this film explored how during divorce, it's not just the immediate family that's affected, but also the extended family members. Now, in this case, they took a bit of a shortcut and just said, you know, Charlie doesn't really have much contact with his own biological family. So Nicole's family had actually been taken in by him as a sort of surrogate because he didn't have contact and he didn't have what he needed from the family that he was born into. And this created such a heartbreaking situation for him because he not only had to watch Nicole get further and further away as they split apart, but also her family and the family that he had adopted into his own life and considered to be really close to him. So in a way that was even more painful for him because he didn't have anyone to fall back to the way that she did. So whilst I really enjoyed this film, and for the most part I found it to be absolutely fantastic, there were a few issues that I did have, a few criticisms that I would like to make here. The first point is the fact that the son is never really considered as an actual human being during this entire exchange. No one really asks him what he wants during this entire divorce. No one asks him, you know, the arrangements that he would be okay with in order to go forward and live his life with his family. He's never really considered as someone who has a say in the matter, which is a bit problematic because he's 8 years old, he's very young, but at the same time he's old enough to understand vaguely what's going on. They don't really give him a choice in the matter and instead decide to just pass him around like a parcel during their days, their assigned days. And it gets to the point where he just becomes so whiny and so annoying, and the film kind of brushes it off as him just being kind of an annoying kid, but actually he's also impacted by the events that are happening here, and the film doesn't really address that. It doesn't really address how that divorce is affecting their child. Speaking of the kid being annoying, he was really annoying. There were moments where I was like, I don't even care what this kid is going through, but still the film should have explored how he was feeling throughout this entire process, even if he was just such an annoying little brat. Secondly, I will say that even though I appreciated the fact that the couple was so civil towards each other during this entire process, it did mean that as a result, a lot of the marital issues that they had were kind of downplayed. Now, throughout the entire film, it is revealed very early on actually that Charlie had an affair, but it's something that is just so subtly woven in, like it's not a big deal. For example, during the courtroom scene, Laura Dern does bring it up, like he had several affairs, and all that happens is that Charlie's lawyer just brushes it off as like, no, actually it was only one affair. So, whereas the conversation then steers onto Nicole's alcoholism and implying that she's, you know, an alcoholic and an incompetent mother. They spend a lot of time on that instead. Now, I do think it was a commentary on that double standard that I was talking about earlier, but still, even within the couple themselves, it's never something that is, you know, a big point of contention. The fact that he actually cheated on her and the fact that he belittled her and never really respected her wishes and what she wanted to do with her life. Also, this film kind of wants you to believe that Charlie and Nicole are equally to blame for the breakdown of their relationship. Well, it's difficult to believe that, because as much as I really liked Charlie in this film, he was the one that was in the wrong. Like, clearly there is no 50-50 breakdown, 30-70 maybe. They even give Nicole an extramarital affair of her own, even though, you know, they're getting divorced, but still they're not divorced yet at that point. But it's like, no, Nicole's ugliness came out during the divorce, whereas Charlie's ugliness is the reason why they're getting divorced in the first place. Those two things are not on equal ground, no matter how much I like both characters. And finally, I found it to be a little bit of a paradox how the film does try to really emphasize the double standard between men and women, especially in relationships, and shows how Nicole was overlooked throughout the entirety of her marriage. But then it also overlooks Nicole in the actual film. There's definitely much more of a bias towards Charlie's accomplishments, the fact that he got that grant, and we actually get to see him in his creative process and how he works during those plays. Whereas in the case of Nicole, we only hear at the very end that she got nominated or she won an Emmy for directing, and it's supposed to be like a, there you go, I can be a director too. But it's like, how did you what? We never saw her direct anything. All we did see is her correct some of the crew when she was holding that baby, and that a good director does not make. And I'm starting to sound like Yoda now because I've been watching way too much Star Wars for a video coming up. I think if the film had instead focused on how she was pursuing her career and how that was becoming more successful whilst Charlie's career was deteriorating because of all of the extra energy that he was spending on the divorce, that would have been a bit more of an equal ground to base that success at the end on, because it would have made more sense. We would have seen a little bit more of her journey instead of her having to, you know, have an extramarital affair and sleep with some random guy. We could have seen her, you know, start to direct a few episodes of that TV show that she was on, and then we would have gotten a better understanding of where these two characters were career-wise as well as in their, you know, emotional sense. Overall, I really did enjoy Marriage Story. I think it's a fantastic film. It's such an intimate look into the breakdown of a relationship as well as the formation of a whole new one. Like I said at the beginning of the review, they really are working towards something here. They're working towards having a working relationship for the sake of their child, and I think it was really interesting to see that entire process through its ups and its downs, mostly downs. I never felt like it was boring or that it overstayed its welcome. I enjoyed it from start to finish, and as a result, I'm going to give Marriage Story an 8.5 out of 10. So that's it from me. Now that I've told you guys what I thought of Marriage Story, it's time for you guys to let me know what you thought of the film down in the comments below. Please be sure to subscribe to catch new videos coming up. As I mentioned, I have been watching a lot of Star Wars, so you may be seeing some content related to that on this channel. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really, really appreciate it, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!